Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the most complicated, polarizing, and detailed stories and give you the comprehensive view straight from the source material.
Today, we are undertaking a monumental deep dive into the life of Hugh Hefner, the American magazine publisher, businessman, and cultural architect who founded Playboy.
Hefner, who lived from 1926 until 2017, didn't just launch a successful publication. He transformed it into this global enterprise.
Absolutely. He extended the Playboy brand far beyond just the print magazine. He established the iconic Playboy clubs and, of course, the luxury mansions.
Right, the mansions where the playmates often live, which that alone was a constant source of intense public and media curiosity.
And our sources immediately present a figure who is just defined by these extreme contradictions. On one side, we have the Hefner who was lauded by so many for his relentless promotion of free speech and his staunch support for civil rights.
The self-proclaimed activist. He really used his platform for political ends.
He did. But on the other side, we have the later legacy, the one that's really shaped by severe criticism, by systemic claims of exploitation, control, and, well, significant allegations of misconduct that really define the end of his story.
So our mission today, as we go through the source material, is to thoroughly explore this duality. We're tasked with understanding the full context of the founder of the so-called sexual revolution.
And that means examining the evidence of both his progressive public acts and the very serious accusations regarding his private life.
To set the stage for this kind of peculiar public persona he constructed, we're going to start with a fascinating and perhaps telling detail. Hugh Hefner never actually met Marilyn Monroe.
That's right, which is incredible when you think about it. Marilyn Monroe, she's the enduring symbol associated with the magazine, right? She's the woman featured in the very first Playboy issue in December 1953.
And she was already a massive celebrity at that point.
A huge star. The magazine used photos that had been taken for a 1949 nude calendar shoot, so this was long before Playboy even existed.
And she wasn't paid for their use. By Hefner or the magazine?
Not a dime. Yet, despite this lack of any personal connection during her life, Hefner made this permanent, almost mythological link to her after her death.
He did. In 1992, decades after she had passed, Hefner purchased the crypt immediately next to hers at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles.
And the price was $75,000.
So when he was asked about this purchase, his justification was very direct. He said, "Spending eternity next to Marilyn is an opportunity too sweet to pass up."
That one quote, I think, underscores the way Hefner blurred the line between the personal, the professional, and this creation of an enduring cultural narrative.
He didn't just buy a gravesite.
Yeah.
He bought a permanent association with the founding icon of his entire enterprise.
It really speaks to a very specific kind of control over his own narrative, doesn't it? Ensuring that his legacy would forever be tied to that moment, to Playboy's explosive cultural launch.
To really understand how someone from his background comes to embrace that level of, strategic narcissism and cultural myth-making, we have to rewind. We have to go back to his origins.
Which are absolutely antithetical to the bon vivant image she later embodied.
Exactly. Hugh Marston Hefner was born in Chicago, 1926. His parents, Glenn Lucius Hefner, who was an accountant, and Grace Caroline, a teacher, were defined in the source material as conservative, Midwestern Methodist.
It's a remarkable disconnect when you picture the man in the silk pajamas with the pipe, surrounded by young women. It's almost impossible to connect that image to a home life where his mother harbored the hope that her son would one day become a missionary.
A missionary. That highly structured, traditional religious upbringing became the very thing he would dedicate his life and his business to dismantling.
His early professional life, though, was also quite focused and disciplined. He served in the United States Army between 1944 and 1946.
And he was working as a writer there, right? For a military newspaper.
Yes, which undoubtedly honed his skills as an editor and a communicator.
And then following his military service, he demonstrated this incredible drive toward education. He graduated from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in a stunningly quick 2.5 years.
2.5 years. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and had a double minor in creative writing and art. So he was clearly very ambitious.
He even briefly continued his academic pursuits, taking graduate sociology courses at Northwestern University. But he dropped out before completing the program.
Which suggests, a restless intelligence and maybe a growing sense that formal, established institutions just couldn't contain his ambitions.
And the single event that triggered the creation of his entire empire was, almost comically, a minor bureaucratic slight. He was working as a copywriter for Esquire magazine in January 1952.
And he quit that job simply because he was denied a $5 raise.
Just think about that for a moment. The denial of $5 sparked the genesis of a multi-million-dollar global brand that fundamentally altered cultural mores across the world.
That denial, that perceived lack of respect, it was the catalyst. It propelled him toward creating a business where he, and only he, controlled the output, the image, and the financing.
He wanted independence, and he decided to seize it completely.
The magazine, which he initially planned to name Stag Party, officially launched as Playboy in December 1953.
And the financing of this venture, it really reveals both his determination and the incredible risk he was taking.
He started with a very small personal financial base, a $600 mortgage on his furniture.
From there, he managed to raise $8,000 from 45 different investors.
And here's the deeply contradictory detail. Among those investors was his own mother, Grace Caroline. She contributed $1,000.
But the sources make it very clear. She funded him not because she believed in the venture.
No, but purely because she believed in her son.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? The very conservative value of familial trust funded the launch of the magazine that was designed to reject conservative values entirely.
And the immediate success validated his audacity. That first issue, with the unauthorized Marilyn Monroe calendar photos, sold over 50,000 copies.
That guaranteed the magazine's financial survival right out of the gate. It proved the market existed for his concept of, quote, sophisticated eroticism.
From that point forward, Hefner wasn't just managing a magazine, he was cultivating a lifestyle, a singular public identity.
He aggressively promoted the bon vivant persona, the sophisticated single man enjoying the finer things in life, free from the restraints of traditional marriage and puritanical morality.
And this persona wasn't just limited to the magazine's editorial pages. Hefner physically embodied it, and he used television as a really powerful extension of the brand.
Right. He hosted Playboy's Penthouse from 1959 to 1960, and then later Playboy After Dark from 69 to 70.
Those shows really cemented him as the primary figurehead. They were this mix of interviews, music, and that signature Playboy aesthetic.
He truly was the central image, the editor-in-chief, the chief creative officer of his own world. He sold the fantasy, and then he lived inside it for public consumption.
The Playboy philosophy itself, which he often articulated, was essentially an argument against what he saw as residual American Puritanism.
It championed a bachelor lifestyle centered on leisure, consumerism, and sexual freedom, arguing that these pursuits were healthy, sophisticated, and ultimately a force for good.
So now, as we move into the era where Playboy really gained cultural dominance, we need to shift our focus to the period where Hefner, perhaps unexpectedly, positioned himself as a dedicated activist.
It's crucial to acknowledge this aspect of his life because it directly informs the complexity of his legacy. He used his immense cultural platform and his personal wealth to actively fight major social battles,
Specifically in the realms of civil rights and free expression.
Let's start with a surprising territory he entered in the mid-1950s, challenging the prevailing attitudes towards sexual identity.
Right. In 1955, he published a science fiction story by Charles Beaumont titled The Crooked Man.
A story that had been rejected by other major publications, including his former employer, Esquire.
Exactly. It was provocative because it was set in a dystopian society where homosexuality was the norm and heterosexual people were the marginalized, persecuted minority.
And when Playboy received pushback from critics for publishing that kind of content, Hefner defended it with a remarkably sophisticated, universalist argument for tolerance.
He stated plainly, he said, if it was wrong to persecute heterosexuals in a homosexual society, then the reverse was wrong too.
So he framed his defense not as an endorsement of any specific sexuality, but as a fundamental defense of universal human rights and tolerance for all minorities.
This position, arguing for the rights of marginalized sexual groups decades before mainstream acceptance, placed him as an early, if commercially motivated, champion of what would later become the LGBTQ rights movement.
And he carried this through. Later in life, he actively supported the legalization of same-sex marriage, defining it as a fight for all our rights.
His commitment to racial integration was equally visible and tactical, particularly in the 1960s. The Playboy clubs, established across the country, were often referred to as private key clubs.
And these clubs were notably progressive for their time in terms of racial diversity. Unlike so many other upscale clubs and venues in a segregated United States, Hefner insisted that the Playboy clubs employ and welcome Black patrons and performers.
A prime example of this commitment occurred in 1961. Hefner saw the comedian Dick Gregory perform in Chicago.
And he hired him on the spot.
Immediately, he hired Gregory to work at the Chicago Playboy Club, recognizing his talent and using the brand's visibility to elevate him.
And Gregory himself explicitly credited Hefner with launching his career that night. By placing black performers on his stages and ensuring integration within his venues, Hefner was making a tangible political statement about equality in the entertainment and leisure industries.
Furthermore, Hefner weaponized the long-form Playboy interview, which was established in 1962. He transformed it into this vital platform for national dialogue.
He gave space to figures who were central to the civil rights movement.
Which meant serious, in-depth conversations with leaders like Malcolm X in 1963 and Martin Luther King Jr. in 1966.
And these were figures who were rarely afforded that kind of mainstream, unexpurgated space in other major publications.
But perhaps the most audacious editorial decision he made was commissioning the 1966 interview with George Lincoln Rockwell,
the founder of the American Nazi Party.
Yes. And the assignment itself was extraordinary. Hefner sent Alex Haley, who was black and who would later become famous for writing Roots, to conduct the interview.
The logistics of that are just astonishing. And it reveals the risk Playboy was willing to take for journalistic controversy.
Rockwell was reportedly shocked when Haley showed up. He only agreed to proceed after receiving specific assurances that Haley was not Jewish.
And during the entire exchange, the sources describe Rockwell keeping a loaded handgun conspicuously placed on the table between them.
This decision, to give a platform to an extremist figure, but to use a black journalist to conduct the interview, placing that man in demonstrable danger, was a major move.
It demonstrated Hefner's belief that all ideas, even the most hateful, should be subject to public scrutiny, filtered through a journalistic lens.
The tension of that encounter was so palpable it was later dramatized, with James Earl Jones playing Haley in the 1979 miniseries Roots: The Next Generations.
Simultaneously, Hefner was fighting a decades-long battle against censorship, often putting himself in direct legal jeopardy. The most famous instance was his 1963 arrest.
That arrest was for promoting obscene literature, specifically an issue that featured nude photographs of the actress Jane Mansfield in bed with a man.
And this case occurred during a really critical period in U.S. legal history concerning obscenity.
It was a true test of the evolving standards. This was just a few years after the landmark 1957 Roth v. United States Supreme Court decision, which defined obscenity based on whether the average person, applying contemporary community standards, would find the material appealing to prurient interest.
So the case against Hefner was significant because it forced a definition of those contemporary community standards in the context of what he positioned as artistic and sophisticated photography.
The case ultimately resulted in a hung jury, which prevented a conviction and served as a powerful victory against censorship.
He used his resources to solidify this commitment philanthropically as well. His support for the University of Southern California, USC, included a specific $100,000 donation to create a graduate course called Censorship in Cinema.
And that wasn't his only educational contribution. He also established a substantial $2 million endowment specifically for the study and preservation of American film.
And in recognition of these efforts, the university's audiovisual archive was renamed the Hugh M. Hefner Moving Image Archive in 2007.
To institutionalize his core values, he established the Hugh M. Hefner Foundation in 1964, dedicating it to facilitating individual rights in our democratic society.
And through this foundation, he created the First Amendment Award, dedicated to honoring individuals who actively protected and fought for free speech rights.
It's clear that Hefner saw himself and positioned his brand as being on the front lines of progressive political and social change.
So if we look at this period, we see a publisher who was undeniably a political actor and a philanthropist in the context of civil rights, free speech, and sexual minority rights.
He framed all of this as part of the fight to prevent society from turning back to what he called an earlier puritanical time.
And this political scaffolding, it provided the philosophical justification for the entire Playboy enterprise. The claim was that the magazine and the lifestyle it promoted were not just about pleasure.
They were fundamentally about freedom.
Now we must transition from the image of the public activist and the crusader for the First Amendment to the complex and increasingly criticized realities of his personal life, particularly the era defined by the Playboy Mansion.
His approach to relationships appears to have been permanently scarred by a foundational experience in his first marriage. He married Mildred Williams in 1949, and they had two children, Christy and David.
But before their wedding, Mildred confessed to him that she had had an affair while he was serving in the Army.
And Hefner described this admission as the most devastating moment of my life. This deeply personal wound is cited as a profound turning point in his view of commitment and relationships.
What followed was perhaps even more telling. Sources from a 2006 profile noted that Mildred, seeking to mitigate her guilt and save the marriage, actually permitted Hefner to have sexual relations with other women.
That sounds less like a marriage compromise and more like the immediate foundation of the entire Playboy philosophy.
Exactly.
Right.
Did the sources suggest he used that initial painful experience to rationalize the later creation of his freewheeling, commitment-free lifestyle?
Absolutely. The trauma from that perceived betrayal, coupled with the permission granted by Mildred, seems to have created the ideological license for his future life. He began to equate freedom with non-monogamy.
And the marriage eventually failed. They divorced in 1959.
After that, Hefner then fully embraced and defined the bon vivant persona he sold in his magazine. This new life involved a continuous and significant rotation of partners.
He was remarkably candid about this, too. He admitted in interviews that during some years he was involved with maybe 11 out of 12 months worth of playmates.
He had high-profile relationships throughout the 60s and 70s with women like Barbie Benton and Sandra Theodore, and he faced legal challenges, including a $35 million palimony suit filed by a former girlfriend, Carrie Lee.
His experimentation wasn't limited to heterosexual relationships either. In 1971, Hefner publicly acknowledged that he had experimented with bisexuality.
And that same year, he made the crucial geographic shift. He acquired the property that became known as Playboy Mansion West in Los Angeles.
He permanently relocated from Chicago to the Los Angeles mansion in 1975, cementing it as the absolute epicenter of his personal and professional world.
The mansion became the physical manifestation of the Playboy philosophy.
But there was a crucial, often overlooked moment that temporarily halted the excesses of this lifestyle. That was in 1985. At age 58, Hefner suffered a minor stroke.
The sources indicate this health crisis prompted a serious reevaluation of his life and its frantic pace. Following the stroke, he significantly toned down the wild, all-night parties that had defined the mansion for a decade.
This period also coincided with a major transition in the corporate structure. His daughter, Christy Hefner, who had shown incredible business acumen, took over the full operation of Playboy's commercial business in 1988.
A significant professional shift towards stability.
Following this period of reflection, Hefner attempted a dramatic pivot back toward a conventional life. In 1989, he married the Playmate of the Year, Kimberly Conrad,
Who was 36 years younger than him.
And for the duration of this second marriage, which produced two sons, Marston Glenn and Cooper, sources described the Playboy Mansion being temporarily transformed. It was called a family-friendly homestead.
But the shift back to domesticity proved temporary. The couple separated in 1998, with Conrad moving into the house adjacent to the mansion.
But they remained legally married for 11 years after their separation, delaying the formal divorce until 2010.
That delay was tactical. Hefner stated he remained married for the sake of his children, waiting until their youngest son turned 18. Once divorced, he quickly reverted to his established pattern.
And this is the era that became internationally famous because of reality television. Hefner became known for moving an ever-changing coterie of young women into the mansion,
often dating as many as 7 concurrently.
This dynamic was thoroughly documented on the reality series The Girls Next Door, which ran from 2005 to 2009. The show featured his primary girlfriends at the time, Holly Madison, Bridget Marquardt, and Kendra Wilkinson.
That show really cemented the image of the aging Hefner surrounded by young women, maintaining control over their lives and schedules, even as all 3 of the starring women ultimately left the mansion in October 2008 to pursue their own paths.
His final, complex romantic entanglement was with Crystal Harris. They became engaged in December 2010.
But the engagement ended dramatically when Harris broke it off just 5 days before the wedding was scheduled to take place in June 2011.
The public timing of that was deeply embarrassing. The July issue of Playboy, which was already printed and shipped before the cancellation, hit the stands just days after the broken engagement.
And Harris was prominently featured on the cover with the headline, "Introducing America's Princess, Mrs. Crystal Hefner."
Despite that public humiliation, they reconciled, and they married on December 31st, 2012.
It was also around this time, in 2012, that Hefner announced his youngest son, Cooper, was the intended successor to become the public face of Playboy.
And the mansion itself remained tied to Hefner until his death. In 2016, the property was initially listed for $200 million.
It eventually sold later that year for $100 million, but with a highly specific, legally binding condition.
And that condition was that Hefner would be allowed to continue living and working there until his death.
This guaranteed he maintained physical control over his symbolic headquarters right up to the end, ensuring that his public image remained inextricably linked to that legendary property.
Beyond the bedroom and the boardroom, Hefner's influence was felt through his philanthropic efforts. And it's important to see these contributions, too, as they further complicate the narrative of a man primarily focused on hedonism.
His public contributions often supported major civic symbols. The clearest example is his pivotal role in saving the iconic Hollywood sign.
Right, in 1978, the sign was dilapidated and needed a complete overhaul.
Hefner became a crucial fundraiser for this restoration. He hosted a major gala fundraiser at the Playboy Mansion and personally contributed $27,000.
Which amounted to exactly 1/9 of the total cost required to rebuild the sign.
He didn't just contribute money generally. He symbolically purchased one of the letters in a ceremonial auction. He bought the letter Y.
And decades later, his commitment to the area remained strong. In 2010, he donated the final $900,000 needed by a conservation group.
And this money was vital for purchasing the land and stopping housing development that threatened the cherished vista surrounding the sign.
His foundation also made some deeply meaningful contributions to areas of physical well-being and justice that contrast so sharply with his public image.
For example, the Hugh M. Hefner Foundation provided crucial seed funding for Marty Goddard's prototype of the rape kit.
This is a profound and specific contribution to forensic science and victim advocacy. It enabled a vital tool used globally in criminal justice and victim care.
He also invested heavily in animal advocacy, frequently supporting various animal charities, including throwing fundraiser events for organizations like Much Love Animal Rescue.
His dedication to animal causes even led to a very unusual honor. An endangered subspecies of marsh rabbit, Sylvilagus palustris hefneri, was named after him in recognition of his significant financial support for its preservation efforts.
However, his philanthropic choices were not always aligned with scientific consensus. Our sources specifically noted that he also contributed money to Generation Rescue,
which is identified as an anti-vaccinationist campaign organization, notably supported by the celebrity Jenny McCarthy.
It's a classic example of the disjointed, sometimes contradictory nature of his giving, driven less by a unified political philosophy and more by supporting causes that challenged established norms, whether they were established medical norms or established social norms. Politically, he had initially been a Democratic donor, but in 2011 he announced on Twitter that he had officially become an independent, citing dissatisfaction with both major parties. Despite that formal change in registration, he continued to engage politically, supporting Barack Obama's re-election campaign in 2012.
And, as we mentioned, his social stances remained fiercely consistent, especially regarding marriage equality, which he viewed as an extension of the broader fight for individual rights that he had championed for decades.
Theologically, Hefner was unambiguous about his secular outlook, which really fundamentally underpinned the Playboy philosophy's rejection of traditional morality.
In a 2000 interview with his own magazine, he declared, "It's perfectly clear to me that religion is a myth. It's something we have invented to explain the inexplicable."
A Christian author who interviewed him later characterized Hefner as holding a very minimalistic, deistic view of God. This shows that the rejection of his conservative Methodist upbringing wasn't just superficial, it was complete.
It was replaced by a staunch belief in non-religious freedom and expression as the highest societal good.
Now we arrive at the most difficult and necessary part of this deep dive: the profound and extensive claims of exploitation, control, and systemic abuse that were levied against Hefner, particularly in the years following his death.
And this requires us to report the serious, specific allegations contained in our source material with solemn impartiality.
Criticism of Hefner as an exploiter rather than a liberator was present even during his lifetime. Prominent feminist critics used stark language to describe his enterprise.
Suzanne Moore, writing in The Guardian, explicitly labeled Hefner a pimp, a term he had fiercely contested and even threatened legal action over.
Moore's argument was precise, that by making soft corn acceptable and hip, Hefner established a commercial mechanism where he bought and sold women to other men, effectively making the selling of female flesh respectable and legitimate.
This critique goes right to the heart of the duality, that Hefner's perceived liberation was simply the sophisticated marketing of commodification.
Julie Bindel echoed the sentiment, arguing in The Independent that Hefner caused immeasurable damage by turning porn, and therefore the buying and selling of women's bodies, into a legitimate business.
So they saw him as institutionalizing the acceptance of a transactional relationship involving women's bodies, but under the guise of sophistication.
The central critique, therefore, is that Hefner mainstreamed the exploitation of women's bodies. Robin Abkarian, reporting for the Los Angeles Times, quoted Wendy Hamilton, who claimed Hefner probably did more to mainstream the exploitation of women's bodies than any other figure in American history.
Hamilton's analysis further contended that Hefner managed to convince many women that taking off their clothes for men's pleasure was not just empowering, but a worthy goal in itself.
This suggests a deeply manipulative narrative where the brand sold female participants the idea that they were liberated when, in reality, they were allegedly being molded to exist solely for the pleasure and profit of men.
And even those who lived intimately with him described an environment designed for control and psychological manipulation.
Right. His former long-term live-in girlfriend, Holly Madison, detailed the internal dynamics of the mansion.
She stated that Hefner would encourage competition and body image issues between his multiple live-in girlfriends.
That kind of dynamic fosters insecurity and reliance on Hefner, maximizing his control over the women's lives. Madison concluded that Hefner's legacy is ultimately full of evidence of the exploitation of women for professional gain.
The sources also reveal the lengths Hefner went to conceal the reality of the mansion lifestyle from his own family.
Christian author Ed Stetzer reported a particularly telling detail. Hefner would order the residence to be systematically cleaned whenever his daughter, Christy Hefner, visited.
And this was reportedly done specifically to keep the realities from his own daughter.
Which speaks volumes about an alleged awareness that the domestic reality of the sexual revolution she promoted was not something he wished his own children to witness firsthand.
Stetzer reflected on the societal cost of Hefner's role as the general of the sexual revolution, questioning the impact of this so-called liberation on individuals and families.
He noted that many people enslaved and trapped in the adult entertainment industry have been figuratively and literally stripped, not only of their clothes, but their very value as people made in the image of God.
The most profound and severe claims emerged publicly after his death. In 2022, the 12-part A&E documentary series Secrets of Playboy brought forward a wave of new, systematic allegations from former partners and employees.
The claims reported in the source material are deeply upsetting. They detail a culture of systematic sexual misconduct and manipulation that permeated the mansion environment.
They included allegations regarding the recreational and manipulative use of drugs and intense peer pressure.
And the serious nature of these claims goes far beyond general misconduct. The allegations reported included claims of rape, forced and violent anal sex, and sexual assault without consent,
including instances where victims were allegedly in a state of drug-induced stupor or unconsciousness.
Furthermore, there were claims of pervasive surveillance, including spying and non-consensual videotaping.
Disturbingly, there were also allegations of illegal sex with minors allegedly committed by Hefner and his celebrity friends and guests at the mansion and other locations.
These accounts paint a devastating picture of an environment where boundaries were allegedly non-existent and control was exerted through power, drugs, and psychological manipulation.
It is necessary to state that these accounts represent a harrowing perspective shared by those who experienced the reality behind that carefully constructed image.
The corporate entity that owns the brand today, the publicly owned PLBY Group, was forced to respond to the severity of these claims, releasing a statement before the documentary series even aired.
They publicly distanced themselves from their founder, stating unequivocally, "Today's Playboy is not Hugh Hefner's Playboy. We trust and validate these women and their stories, and we strongly support those individuals who have come forward to share their experiences."
The documentation of these accusations continues. Most recently, in January 2024, his widow, Crystal Harris,
who had previously defended her life at the mansion.
Yes. She published a memoir where she alleged she experienced a hostile and controlled environment, claiming she felt imprisoned while residing there.
Hugh Hefner passed away peacefully at the Playboy Mansion on September 27, 2017, at the age of 91.
The immediate causes of death were determined to be cardiac arrest and respiratory failure, exacerbated by sepsis brought on by an E. coli infection.
And, as he planned decades earlier, he was interred at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, in the crypt he purchased immediately beside the resting place of Marilyn Monroe.
The final synthesis of Hugh Hefner's life really demands that we maintain this perspective of holding two contrasting narratives simultaneously.
On one side, you have the Hefner who actively debated obscenity laws, who fought for racial integration in his clubs, who supported LGBTQ rights, and who funded essential public tools like the rape kit prototype.
He was a progressive cultural warrior who challenged the social restrictions of the 1950s and 60s, successfully arguing that pleasure was not synonymous with sin.
And on the other side, we have the figure at the center of widespread, profound accusations, allegations of systemic exploitation, manipulation, and abuse, documented extensively by former partners and employees.
Claims that define the severe shadow of his legacy.
He promoted a philosophy centered on liberation and freedom, yet critics argued this philosophy was built on a foundation that stripped individuals, in the words of critics, not only of their clothes, but their very value as people made in the image of God.
This deep dive has explored how Hefner's Playboy philosophy successfully managed to redefine American morality and consumer culture throughout the latter half of the 20th century.
However, when we consider the detailed, systematic claims of exploitation and abuse that have emerged following his death, the essential societal challenge remains.
The question is this: where should society draw the necessary ethical line between genuine sexual liberation and commercial practices that, critics argue, enabled systemic harm and abuse?
The inability to neatly separate the progressive activist from the alleged exploiter, the interplay between the revolutionary idealism and the claims of profound personal harm, that complex, unresolved dichotomy is Hugh Hefner's enduring legacy for you to explore.